Time to elevate.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Running on Empty. I'm Matt.
And I'm Tony.
And we are running on empty. And we have a repeat visitor today to our show. I want to
Thunder was correct, Matt.
That's awesome. We got Chris Terry with us.
Yes. Chris, as we all know, is an assistant professor of media law at the University of Minnesota. He's a recognized expert on many First Amendment issues. And actually, Chris, we're going to spend some time talking about this latest controversy in the UW system, dealing with a survey that an institution at UW Stout tried to send out system-wide. But before we get to that, as we record today is the opening day for the Milwaukee Brewers.
Yeah.
And we know you're a baseball fan, and you know who they're opening against today, right?
Yeah, I'm not allowed to say that on the air, though.
They're opening up against the St. Louis Cardinals.
Yeah, I have feelings.
And Chris, for our listeners who don't know, Chris, at least a dozen times during baseball season, puts out on social media that he hates the St. Louis baseball team. Chris, what is the root of your hatred for the Cardinals? Is that they just beat the Brewers in the World Series in '82?
They beat the Brewers in the World Series, and they've knocked them out of the playoffs a couple times too in the modern era. And their fans are awful people. Like, can I just say that?
Is that right?
Their fans are awful people. In fact, I was at a conference in Phoenix, and the Brewers happened to be playing the Diamondbacks when I was there. And I bought a ticket, and I was sitting in the Diamondbacks like home section when I was at the stadium, and I struck up a conversation with the Diamondbacks fan who was sitting next to me, and he actually unprompted asked me if the Cardinals fans ever come to Miller Park, and I said yeah, and he's like, boy, I hate those people. So it's not just me, okay? It's not just me who feels that way.
No, I do have a Cardinal story. I've actually worked with the St. Louis Cardinals a couple of years. We did a big fundraiser with them in St. Louis at their ballpark village. And we were doing, some game show stuff with them and the players, and it was all to benefit a hospital. So I got to encounter some of the St. Louis fans, but on their home turf, and they treated me really nice. But the story is I was behind the scenes waiting for the next segment to go on. And I was talking with, he was one of the pitchers at the time, his name Jason Mott. Guy was a total joker, great pitcher. And he goes, so are you a Cardinals fan? I said, well, I'm really a Brewers fan. And he's like, ooh, he goes, why not a Cardinals fan? I said, well, I'm going to go back to the 82 World Series. And I said, I'm a little jaded on that. He goes, dude, I wasn't even born yet. So we had a lot of fun with the players. I'm glad we actually over here in Colorado got Matt Holliday, because I worked with Matt Carpenter a little bit, and he wasn't necessarily the nicest guy, didn't really want to be there, but Matt Holliday was really, really cool. So I've had some positive experiences, but I'm still not necessarily a fan because of, again, what you said, going back to the whole World Series stuff, not come out of playoffs. So that's my beef, but the experience I had was pretty good.
All right. So we know that Chris is triggered by the St. Louis Cardinals.
I won't say
another thing that triggers Chris Terry, and this is what we're here today for, is really abuses of the First Amendment. And we want to start off talking about something that's going on in the UW system, where there's an Institute for Innovation in the UW Stout campus, and they put together a survey that was designed apparently to survey students throughout the UW system on their perceptions of free speech protection on campuses. And the idea was that this survey was going to be distributed to everyone. At this point in the semester, we're about 9 or 10 weeks in, and there was such an outcry that it actually led to the resignation of the University of Wisconsin Whitewater chancellor. Wow. What's his name, Chris? Jim Henderson,
something like that. Yeah,
Henderson, who said that he wouldn't advise anyone at this point to apply to be a chancellor in the UW system. So, Chris, can you just flesh this out for us? You've seen this survey. What was the purpose of this in your judgment?
Well, I saw the draft of the survey that was put out by Dan Bice from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. So I don't know if there's other versions of it. The version I saw was the 3/7/22 draft that Dan Bice published and as part of his coverage of it.
Well, that would have been the version that Chancellor Henderson would have objected to.
I believe that's the case. I don't know that for sure, but I certainly know that this is one version of it that was going around. I've heard that there were others, there were earlier drafts of it. I haven't seen any of those, but this one itself is rather problematic. Aside from collecting some demographic information that no one in the UW system should be collecting in an anonymous file, religious information, gender identity, and including political affiliations. I mean, the level of data that is asked
it asks students if they lean Democratic or Republican
or libertarian or green, or you know, we don't have a lot of solid information about how this survey was to be distributed. There's been a couple of different discussions of that, but if what the reporting on it is accurate, was saying is that it was going to be distributed to every student in the UW system.
Correct.
And that would be a heck of a pile of data for someone to get their hands on. If they could track percentages of students at each campus, because it asks them what campus they go to, how many are Green Party, how many are Libertarian Party, how many are Republican, how many are Democrat. I mean, that alone is really problematic. Especially because, at least as I would suspect that this project was probably to be distributed via Qualtrics, that logs the IP address of every single person who uses it, and the email address. At least in my experience, it even tells you when and how, what internet browser the person was using to use at the time. That, I mean, I've used Qualtrics in some of my own research, and the amount of data that it collects on the people who respond to a survey is rather substantial. So you would have a honeypot of data here that would be just ripe for exploitation. And I have some significant issues on the privacy side that relate to that. I don't think any of these questions are related to people's identity. And there's two reasons I really object to it. One, I don't think that pile of data should exist, and it certainly shouldn't have been mandated on students to respond to this thing. But number two, it's very clear that the questions are phrased in such a way as to tie the answers specifically to individual factors.
Okay.
There's questions in there about offensive speech that could be tied to different groups and how they relate to offensive but protected speech. There's definitely an effort to tie students who don't want to talk in class about controversial issues to their political or gender political ideology or gender identity.
Let me ask you this, Chris. Before you go on. Is it unusual in social science? To be charitable, let's call this a social science research study, right?
Well, that is charitable.
Is it unusual in social science research to tie responses to identity data?
No, it's not. But what is unusual is to not anonymize that data. And there's no indication that this data would have been anonymized in any way. Now, I'm not saying it wouldn't have been, but at least in the reporting I've seen on this and in the study design that I see, and assuming Qualtrics was used or something similar to Qualtrics to collect the data, we're not talking about an anonymized study here. And remember, this is data that anybody could access. If it's created by the UW system, it's partially a public record.
It's a public record. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And you're talking about, tens of thousands of people in their, late teens and early 20s who are going to have their gender identity and political ideology tied to a specific computer. I mean, that is wow.
For our listeners who may not know, on any university campus that gets federal funds, a research project has to go through what's called an institutional review board that will determine if the study is on the up and up, is it ethical, can it potentially harm people, and so on. The people behind this study at UW Stout claim that it did get passed by the IRB at Stout, and that they were in conversation with IRBs at other campuses, who I believe they are claiming gave the green light on this. What's your sense of what an IRB should have done in a situation like this, Chris?
Well, there's a lot of problems. First off, the IRB should have demanded that the information be anonymized. That's just a fundamental principle on something like this. But beyond that, I am not aware of any IRB study that, and I went to Madison, right? We did IRB studies all the time when I was in grad school.
Right.
I am not aware of any study that can be mandated to be sent to every single student. I mean, it may have happened, but I am not aware of it.
Well,
and I was involved in the UW system for a long time, as you know, Tony.
Oh yeah.
I never saw anything at that scale. And I would think that any IRB would immediately raise a question about the study design if it's intended to go out to everybody. Now, if it's voluntary, that's I guess I could see their way around that. But this wasn't being described as voluntary. If you read the rhetoric around the study, it was sort of being pushed on students that they were going to sort of be compelled to respond. And
they do have a voluntary statement in the survey, though.
But they don't have to respond to this, do they? I mean,
right,
like if I get it in my email, I'd go, oh, whatever, and I delete it. Like I get a lot of surveys. But what do you actually think the percentage of response might be for something like this?
Well, the problem with that, of course, is that whatever it would be skewed one way or another.
Sure, right,
There's a lot of people who would take a look at this thing and wouldn't want to finish it because of the data it's collecting on them. And then you'd have groups pushing groups of certain ideology or birds of a feather, so to speak, to finish it. And even if you had an 8 or 9% response rate, if that was a targeted 8 or 9% response rate, you can imagine the headlines that come out of this thing being very skewed.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know. I have a lot of issue with the idea that you can assess free speech on campus by surveying students with questions that really don't quite understand the First Amendment. I think what really drew my attention to this at first was the Bice story about it. And I didn't know about the Whitewater chancellor resigning until I spoke to a couple other First Amendment people about the study. When Dan Bice reported on it at first, I was really just curious about what kind of questions it asked. I didn't have any questions about the design or anything. I was just fundamentally curious.
Right.
But if you look at the questions in the study, I'm having a lot of trouble imagining that somebody actually thought these through. Let's just take one as an example.
Yeah,
okay? It is literally the first one on the survey version that I have. And the question is, quote, the residence hall supervisor removes a political sign from a student's dorm room door. And you have 3 options to respond. The first is, this is a violation of the student's First Amendment rights. This is not a violation of the student's rights, or I'm not sure.
Okay.
Well, okay. An average undergrad in physics might not know as much about the First Amendment as me, but let's talk about this one for just a minute.
Sure.
The correct answer here is, I'm not sure. And I know a little bit about the First Amendment. No, it legitimately is.
Yeah, it is.
Because it depends, right? It depends on whether or not there is actually a specific prohibition that is content neutral about posting stuff on doors.
Exactly.
Many decades ago, when I was wandering the exciting and thrilling cinder block halls of Scott Hall at Oshkosh, there was actually a rule that we were not allowed to tape stuff to the wood dorm room doors. There was a spot immediately to the right of the door where you could post anything that you basically wanted, but you couldn't tape it to the door. I don't remember what the exact explanation for it was. It may just have been as simply they didn't want us damaging the wood on the doors.
Right.
But you couldn't tape anything to the doors. And the residence advisors and the residence hall people would go around and tear that stuff down on a regular basis. And it wasn't because it was political. It was because the rule was don't tape it to the door. Right. So that question's basis is entirely tied to what the actual rule is.
Right.
It may not be a violation of the student's rights if the rule is don't tape stuff to the door. It might not have anything to do with the politics, but it is clearly designed to generate the answer. This is a violation of the student's rights. And that is the first question on this thing. And it gets worse from there, by the way. It gets far worse. So the next one is, and tell me if you don't think this is a slightly leading or biased question. TikTok suspends a student's account because the student posted an anti-vax video. Okay. Well, the answer there is this is not a violation of the student's rights because TikTok is a private platform.
Exactly.
Yep.
What does it have to do with it being an anti-vax video? Okay. Because if that's not the bait in that question, I don't know what is. Right. What difference does it make if it's an anti-vax video? If TikTok takes down any video, yeah, TikTok is infringing with the speech of the student. But guess what? That's TikTok's rights. And TikTok is a Chinese company. They actually do that a lot, by the way. So I'm just saying that, these questions are construed in such a way as to generate specific answers. So the third one, the university administration prohibits student protesters from blocking access to certain buildings on campus. Well, that's a bit leading too.
And what are the choices then?
This is a violation of the student's rights.
Okay.
This is not a violation of the student's rights, or I'm not sure. And again, the correct answer is I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Under the time, place, and manner regulations, correct? You can prevent people from blocking an entryway, right?
Well, there's an infinite number of reasons why the university might not want protesters on a certain spot on campus. That doesn't mean they can't be on campus. So that area behind Reeve Union has forever and a day been considered a public forum on the campus, right? I mean, there is no question about that. And anyone can congregate out there. Boy, I can remember some really colorful characters congregating out there when I was in school. Matt's not exactly alive right now. Matt, you may have been one of those colorful characters. But my point is, that's different than telling people they can't block off Grunhagen Hall. Right. Or you can't be on the lawn over where Clemens Hall used to be, or you can't protest in the space between Halsey and the communication building there. Right. That there's a legitimate reason why they might not want you in a specific place, but that isn't an infringement upon your rights. If there's a legitimate reason why they don't want you blocking off Algoma Boulevard.
So let me ask you this, Chris. The Menard Center up there at Stout brands itself as being all about civil liberties and constitutional rights. So wouldn't you have thought that they would have consulted with a few First Amendment scholars before putting a survey like this together?
Okay. And so this was my original interest in the survey, is that they said they contacted First Amendment experts on this. Well, I'm going to say I don't know all of them personally, but I know certainly all of them in Wisconsin that, they may have asked. And I mean, I showed this to my students in my internet law section at Minnesota, and they immediately identified the problematic questions, right, as undergraduates. And, I was just legitimately curious if they could pick out the questions that have problems. So let's take another one. This is one of my favorite ones, by the way.
Yeah.
This is
campus housing limits movies which students can watch in the privacy of their dorm room.
What?
The question is this a violation of students' rights? Is this not a violation of students' rights? Or I'm not sure. And again, the answer is, I'm not sure. It depends on what the movie is. So setting aside the entire kiddie porn issue that would obviously fall under this exception.
Sure.
The campus has the right to limit what people can download on its own internet system.
Exactly.
And undergraduates have a catastrophic level of copyright infringement currently.
Oh, yeah.
So the university campus housing could deliberately say, if you're downloading a movie and it's not from a direct streaming site that you have a subscription, we can absolutely prevent you from doing that. But that would meet the criteria of the question. But the way the question is construed is not, it's not getting at what it's trying to get at.
Exactly.
And any real or legitimate or logical First Amendment scholar would see the gaps in these questions.
Well, let me ask you this, Chris. Even if these questions were perfect,
well, in terms, we're a long way from that.
We're a long way from that. But even if that were the case, again, I'm not a social scientist, but I hang out with social scientists.
Well, that's fun.
The fact that they were not,
sorry.
The fact that they were not using any kind of principle of random sampling, wouldn't that make any findings suspect, even if it was a great survey?
Immediately it would.
So inherently, that means that this is a political document. It's got nothing to do with finding out what the state of the First Amendment really is on our campus.
That's what it sounds like to me.
I'm reluctant to say that that's what I think, but it is what I think.
What now? I don't know.
I haven't seen all of the communications about this.
Well, I don't know if this was in Bice's article, Chris. I mean, I read that article, but it's been at least a week to 10 days now. But my understanding is that one of the reasons why the Chancellor Henderson may have resigned, we don't know, he hasn't been fully open about it, is it looked like originally the system was rejecting this, was saying we're not going to do this. And then all of a sudden, some politicians on the legislative university committee, whatever it's called, pushed back, and they said, we want this survey. And it looked like the system gave in to pressure and said, okay, we'll do it. So do you see this as part of what we've been dealing with for the last 10, 15 years of this increased politicization of the UW, of which this is a part of it?
Well, I'm certainly not a member of the UW anymore. I carry 3 degrees from the UW system, but I've certainly been party to watching what's happened to UW over that period of time.
Yeah.
And I struggle to find another explanation. I mean, I don't like to cast aspersions that I can't back up empirically. And I would really like to read some of the open records requests that are being made about this down the road to have a little bit more firm grasp. But the way this is construed, it's really not an act. Whatever it was intended to do, it doesn't actually do. Right. In terms of assessing the First Amendment or free speech or the knowledge of free speech on campus, it doesn't do that because the questions are either leading or inaccurate in ways that don't actually assess First Amendment knowledge, unless the answer is really to test people down to that really micron level that I understand the First Amendment at. But these are questionable situations. It's not that clear. And I would really love to believe that that's the case, but I don't.
I mean, the survey seems to reinforce an already existing narrative that the UW is hostile to free speech.
Yes, very much.
The students don't care about the First Amendment, and that students who are outspoken, especially conservative students, are being canceled on the campus. So that's what this survey was designed to reinforce that narrative. And then whoever the Republican governor candidate is could have taken this data and went on this crusade about how if I get elected, I'm going to straighten up that UW. Ron Johnson could have run on this in his campaign. That to me, and I hate to be cynical about it, because it seems to me, Chris, if you really wanted to find out what's going on with free speech in the UW, some kind of focus group methodology would probably be more reliable than a survey that goes out to, I don't know how many students there are on the UW system, but it's a lot, right? And you're not going to get anything even closely resembling a random sample. So I just, to me, it seems like there's a lot of really bad faith actors in this process.
My question is, do you think a lot of these students are going to kind of see, I mean, the way we're talking about it, we're looking at these questions from a different perspective, but the average student that's going to read this, do you think they're going to see through that bullshit?
Well, I don't know that, Matt. And that's part of my larger question here. I certainly think there's a political motivation behind this.
Yeah.
But on assessing I think assessing free speech on campus is a great idea.
So do
right? I'm all for it.
I'm 100% for that.
But doing it with questions that suggest the following: a student threatens another student with immediate violence based on their beliefs, and then asking the students to decide whether or not that behavior is protected, not protected, or I'm not sure. Right? I mean, that's a question that is so leading that you're not actually assessing anything. So let's play that one out. Okay. A student threatens another student with immediate violence based on their beliefs. Well, what beliefs? I lived with a Viking fan at one point. I'm sure at some point or another, there was a threat of immediate violence in our apartment, right? Does that mean that's not protected speech? No, it doesn't, because it matters on whether or not the threat is a true threat.
Yes.
Right? It's not unprotected until it's a legitimate threat for actual violence. But it doesn't say it's a legitimate threat. It says it's an immediate threat.
Mm-hmm. Ask Chris Rock that question.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Same thing, right?
Let's try another one, Tony, because I got a kick out of this one too.
Yeah.
A professor criticizes an elected official on the professor's personal Twitter feed.
Mm-hmm.
This behavior is protected, not protected, or I'm not sure. Want to try that one out?
Wow.
I mean, in the sense that on Twitter, you said, right?
Yeah. A professor criticizes an elected official on the professor's personal Twitter feed.
Yeah. Well, again, we're back at TikTok again, correct?
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
Those are private platforms.
Yep.
Right. It's not the criticism is protected, but the fact that it's on Twitter means that it's not protected.
Exactly.
Right. So what's okay. Now I know a little bit about the First Amendment, just a little, right? Just a little.
Just a bit.
I don't know how to answer that question. And I'm a professor who teaches the First Amendment for
exactly.
a living. Right. So the answer there again is, well, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Right. Because at least in theory, the expression would be protected, but the fact it's on Twitter would mean that it's not protected. So what is it being protected from?
Right.
Right. And you can't answer that. A student mocks another student for their choice of clothes.
Oh, geez.
You want to try that one out, Matt? Your options are behavior is protected, behavior is not protected, or I'm not sure.
I would have to say I'm not sure. I mean, I might not like the clothes that they're wearing, but and I have the freedom to express that. But where is this being said? How is it being said? What platform is it being said? I don't know. That's
Tony.
Well,
I'd have deleted the damn survey by now.
I think the goal of a question like this is to get a lot of students saying it's not protected, and therefore the argument can be made. You see that the UW, there's such snowflakes today on these campuses.
Right, exactly.
They can't even tolerate their wardrobe being criticized. That's the kind of crap that we're dealing with now here. This passes for academic research.
Okay, here's a good one then. A student accuses a university administrator of taking bribes on Instagram when the student knows the accusation is false. Boy, this is what you call the triple whammy here. Okay, I'll read it again, just so we're clear. A student accuses a university administrator of taking bribes on Instagram when the student knows the accusation is false.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, as a First Amendment scholar, that defamation is not protected speech.
Okay.
But we don't know if it's we don't know what evidence the person who has. Oh, they know it's false.
It says they know the accusation is false.
Right. So the answer to that one would be it is not protected speech, right?
Right. But is it not protected because of the accusation that it's false or that it's on Instagram?
Exactly.
Right. And who's the university administrator? If it's the chancellor, you're going to be able to say a lot of things about someone who's high up in university structure that you wouldn't be able to say about the person who works over in liberal arts as an advisor, who nobody knows who that person is, right?
Right.
That person's going to have a lot better defamation claim there than one of the high profile university administrators. So in that one, you have three outs, right? The knowledge of falsehood is sort of the defamation out there.
Yeah.
You have the Instagram out, which makes the rest of it irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the university administration standard, like what level of person is it?
Sure.
Because defamation is entirely dependent on how public a figure you are.
Right.
Mhm.
But in that one, it's not just how public a figure it are. The argument would be that the university administrator, even who works in liberal arts, could potentially be a public figure or a public official, excuse me,
Right.
which would then also move it to actual malice. So that's why I say it's a triple whammy. And like,
But here's the thing, Chris, if the people promoting this survey believe that the average student should have a Chris Terry, Tony Palmieri, Matt King understanding of the First Amendment, we already know that.
yeah,
But, I mean, there's nothing preventing the UW system right now from saying we're going to dedicate the resources so that every campus can have, let's say, a Gen Ed First Amendment course. I'd be happy to teach it. I teach a First Amendment course, and I know you do also, right? I teach it once every 2 years. I would love to teach it every semester.
yeah.
So if the
500 students, give them to me.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
But I mean, do they
let me have
really
them.
need this survey to reach that conclusion? I don't
but
think so.
Let's keep talking about it. It's so good. There's so much to talk about. So then we move on to the second section. And this is where it really gets fun. Okay. Now, this is an assessment on one of those strongly disagree, slightly disagree, neutral, slightly agree, strongly agree. Okay. To the following statements. Matt, first one's for you.
Oh, thanks.
People should be allowed to say hateful things.
People say hateful things all the time, and you have the right to say them. Does it just saying it, not necessarily a platform?
It says people should be allowed to say hateful things.
They can say hateful things if that's their opinion, but you don't necessarily have to agree with it.
Again, though, strongly agree, except when the hateful thing is actually constitutes a fighting word, at which point then I would strongly disagree that they have the right to say
Sure.
this.
Yes, it's not well qualified. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's the problem with all of these questions.
Yeah.
They're not well qualified. And that's why I really am sort of curious about the Institutional Review Board's access to or review of this, because these questions are the ones that aren't leading are open-ended in ways that really don't, I'm tolerant of other people's views, but only if those views are not offensive. Now, if that's not a politically motivated survey question, I don't know what is. People are trying to be hurtful when they express offensive opinions. Now, this is where I really get down to the data that I was talking about at the beginning. You can imagine what kind of correlations are going to come out between people who report on their gender identity and their political ideology and how they respond to questions like this.
Right.
Sure. That is just gasoline for the fire, man. And you can't tell me that the assessment of that personal data at the end isn't directly designed to be correlated with this information.
Oh, sure.
Of course it is.
And that's what makes that, like, the survey itself is one thing. The collection of the personalized data at the end is something else entirely.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to even know very much about statistics to see how these things would directly be correlated and then reported. And then, oh my God, the talk radio aspect of it in this state and everything else that would come out of this. It's really a problem. Okay. It would be hard to ban hate speech because people can't agree which speech is hateful.
What?
That's actually a question.
I'm putting myself back in my 18-year-old college freshman shoes. And a question like that would leave me just befuddled.
Well, it leaves me befuddled, and I'm a First Amendment expert.
Right.
So,
what is it? What the hell does it even mean?
So it would be hard to ban hate speech because people can't agree which speech is hateful. No, I strongly disagree to that, but not for the reason that they want me to disagree with it.
Right.
It would be very hard to ban hate speech because it's protected by the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Right. It's got nothing to do with it not being able to decide what speech is hateful. Hate speech is an act of violence. Right. Again, these questions are designed to correlate to the specific data. They are not intended, and you cannot convince me that they are not intended to actually assess how people feel about viewpoint diversity on campus. You ready for the good one, though?
Yeah.
This is a good one. When thinking about an issue, I consider as many different views and opinions as possible. Okay, now seriously, guys. I mean, just for a moment, imagine the correlations that come out of the demographic data on this with that question alone. Take the hate speech ones out of it, okay? Right. Imagine the correlation that you could make on there and the fodder that could be.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, it's a leading question anyway. But on top of that, just for 1 second, imagine where that goes. And it is not that. Okay, then it gets better. We're not even to the good stuff yet. Student group. Now, there's 3 options for this one. Student groups often invite speakers to come to campus to express their views on a range of topics. If some students perceive a speaker's message as offensive or biased against certain groups of people, do you think university administrators should disinvite the speaker? And your choices are yes, they should disinvite the speaker. No, they shouldn't disinvite the speaker. Or the great one, I have no opinion.
Now, I have no opinion.
You have no opinion. I find that hard to believe, Matt.
No.
Okay, but again, these are political questions here in this state.
Totally.
Right. This is exactly what when Walker wasn't governor anymore, it was the speeches he was making. He talked about this in Madison a few weeks ago now about, how people just can't, you can't have a conservative voice on campus while he's standing in the red gym talking about how you can't have a conservative voice on campus. I mean, it's just, and I don't know if he's ever been over to the political science school at Madison, but holy cow, right? And the law school, to say nothing of the law school at Madison. There's a few conservatives over there as well. But that's my, and so my interest in this was really tied to what assessment are they doing of the First Amendment? Because I think that's a legitimate issue, especially today when people don't understand really core concepts of First Amendment protection, things like state action and how it relates to social media platforms, right? When speech can be regulated by the government and when it can't, right? And those are, I get that, I understand these things at a much higher level. But when I got into this, I was just outraged. I mean, I was just outraged at just the patent attempt to come up with correlations for fodder for the fire.
Yeah.
And I can't get around. I mean, I don't know that that's what happened, but as somebody who's done survey design, somebody who knows a little bit about the First Amendment, somebody who knows a lot about campus free speech issues, I can't see another explanation here. And I'd love to hear it. And I would love to debate it with somebody who does, but I don't see it. And I'm very concerned, but most concerned of all, obviously there's some problems with the survey design and all that, but the fact that this survey would have allowed correlation between specific demographic groups based on identity and gender identity and political ideology in response to exact answers that could be tied to specific students.
Right.
When the data was collected, boy, I'm having a real hard time believing an IRB signed off on that.
I have a question, and I'm going to kind of precede it with something that happens here in Colorado. It's an election thing. So when we have different referendums, you see all the different, signs and everybody's different opinions on the referendums as to why they want you to vote yes or no. But what the state does is they send out a document or a little booklet that explains what everything is in really explicit detail. So you're not necessarily voting on something you're being duped by this ad or that ad. So in addition to this show, do you think there would be a way to, I guess, inform folks and say, okay, so the survey's coming, but here's, really what we want you to know about it and qualify it before. I mean, can we do that? Is there a way to get that information out?
I think every campus newspaper, every campus media organization in the UW system needs to be put on this very quickly and explain to them that not only, because I this goes to all the issues I teach in many ways, right? There's a digital if this is a digitally administered study, students may not realize how specific the information that they respond to can be tied back to them.
Sure.
Right.
And that, I mean, I can make fun of the questions and all that. And, I certainly would have worded the questions differently or what have you. But, when you're collecting demographic information on people's political ideology and you're sort of mandating that they respond, that's problematic on another level.
Yeah.
And I spent enough hours at WRST and working at the Advanced Titan, right? I would think every one of those organizations needs to be put into place and talked about this, because students, it's one thing for my students to look at this survey and identify the problematic questions. They've had me for media law. They've had me for, internet law. They've had me for First Amendment speech. They've had me for a variety of topics that gives them the skills to identify. But imagine if somebody from physics saw this, or from geology, to put it in UW Oshkosh terms. Are they going to have the media literacy to understand what's going on here and to understand what demographic information is being collected on them? Probably not. And, I think that, do I think that this could be made into something useful? Yes, I do. Is it in that position now? Not even close. Can it be ready by fall? I have really serious questions about whether or not that could actually be done. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have some merit. The idea is sound. It's the execution that's problematic. Sure. And people on campus need to know, a lot of information is going to be collected about you that you may not want people to know. And B, it's being done for somewhat dubious reasons, or at least reasons that appear to be a bit shady. And I don't know. I can't get around. I find no other reasonable explanation for that as somebody who understands these issues at a high level. And I get it. When I started reading the survey, I was dissecting the questions. Well, what about this situation? Or what about, I wasn't allowed to tape stuff to my dorm room door. It didn't have anything to do with whether it was political or not. I get it. I'm at that level, but that gives me an incentive to talk about these things to people. And I will talk to anybody about this survey. I have very strong feelings, and I have already filed a couple of open records requests because I want to know more about how these things were allowed to occur, because I have legitimate questions at this point about what was going on. And so I wasn't actually the first one to do it either. So I'm not sure I'll get quite the response to it.
Well, we're just about out of time, Chris. We're going to have you back on and again in the near future to maybe do a part 2 on this and get into those other issues that we want to get into, like the attacks on the First Amendment. We don't want this particular episode to go on too long.
Sure, I can talk for a lot longer.
I know you can.
Well, and people need to know. Maybe can we get like the college radio stations to put this on the air? Seriously, I think what we're talking about is. I think for now,
because the survey's been pulled and there doesn't appear to be the political will to follow through on this, at least for now. The impetus that the legislature relied on is a law that was passed that requires surveys of campus climate and so on and so forth to be conducted. I suspect we'll see it again, but it'll probably get fixed a little bit before then. But that'll be the time to talk about it when it starts to get circulated. And to the media's credit, they caught on to this pretty fast, especially when the Whitewater chancellor resigned. And they did a good job of blowing this up. And I'm often very critical of Wisconsin media for not following through on their obligations, but they deserve a pat on the back this time. But Matt, when it does come back in the fall, employing student media to get that message directly to students is going to be part of this. And, again, it's not about whether or not they respond. It's whether or not they understand that the data that's being collected on them is fairly significant.
Exactly. Exactly.
And we could get
all right, Chris, we're gonna let you go, and we're gonna have you back again to talk about these issues. And thanks for helping to wake people up about this. I know when I first read the survey, I was like not shocked by it because I immediately saw the politics behind it, and I was somewhat disappointed that it seemed to be one chancellor in the system who was standing up against this. What were the other chancellors doing?
Right.
That's what I would like to know. Why are they so? Yeah, seriously. If in fact, and maybe your open records request will show this, but if in fact there was political pressure to get this out in the 9th or 10th week of a semester, when it clearly has methodological problems, you would think that the chancellors would be unanimous in opposition to that. But clearly that's not what happened here. And I think we deserve to know why.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the chancellors have a lot of, weighty responsibilities, but you would think that the main one is to protect the academic integrity of their institutions. And when something goes out like this that has no sense of random sampling, the questions, as you've exposed, are problematic in many different ways. Obviously, identifying information can be compromised. With all of that, to only hear one chance, and even that chancellor has not really come out specifically against this survey. We're kind of just like assuming that that's what it was.
He never did say.
No. So where are the chancellors on this? That's all right. Hopefully we'll find out as time goes on.
All right. Thanks so much, Chris. All right, Tony, another great interview. I absolutely love it when Chris comes on the show.
Yeah, he clearly read that UW free speech survey. Yeah. And I think the voices of people like Chris Terry hopefully will have the major impact on this, because I don't want to see the UW used for bad faith actor political purposes. And that's what this is looking like. I mean, I think that there are some people who constructed the survey who are obviously scholars and have a real interest in this. But the more we learn about this, it looks like there was some attempt to manipulate this process from politicians. And I think that really has to be fought against.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it's on hold now, but when it decides to rear its ugly head again, I think we're going to have, I feel a responsibility to let people know what this thing, is and what it looks like.
Absolutely.
And get it to campus newspapers, campus radio stations, regular newspapers, TV. If anything, I mean, I know that he said, this could track your IP address. If this was not like the greatest way to get a sponsor for a VPN, I think that would be great. But no, it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I really hope it never sees the light of day overall, but I don't think that's going to actually happen.
Well, like Chris said, and I agree with him, we do need to study the state of free speech on college campuses. That's a legitimate thing, but this is not the way to do it.
Not the way to do it.
With a basically political document that meets none of the criteria for traditional social science research.
No.
I mean, if you're going to do a survey and you're calling it scholarly, at least meet the requirement of random sampling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That to me would be a minimum criteria for social science research.
Definitely.
Or I personally think that focus groups is a much better way of getting at something like this. Get people in groups and get them to talk verbally about what they perceive to be free speech.
Yeah, absolutely.
Documents like this are designed so that really people on all sides of the issue can find weapons, and we shouldn't have weaponized research.
No, not at all.
We should have research designed to get at the truth.
Yeah, because I
have enough evidence now that that's not really what this is about.
No, I mean, so going back to, let's say 8% of the people actually respond to all this. Okay. And then they'll, from that 8%, they won't tell you it was just 8%, but let's say, 90% of our people survey said, and it's like, but actually, what is the actual sample of that? Yeah. And I just think that, to get to get people to understand, what it is, what it really is, and then to qualify it. And that's, I'll go back to the referendum thing. I'm glad those documents exist, because otherwise people be making really bad decisions,
right.
Based upon the information or how it's presented to them. So let's see where this goes, and we'll bring Chris back and definitely have some more discussion on it. Looking forward to that.
And until then, let's all stay elevated.
Stay elevated, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Running on Empty with Matt and Tony.